Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for being here this morning. My name is Donito Burgess. I'm the Community Engagement Manager at Tucson Bird Alliance. We're joined today by Soren Goldsmith. He'll be presenting about conservation and photography. This presentation, as well as all of our virtual photography presentations, are sponsored by Hunt's Photo and Video. We've got Gary Farber on the line here for that. And so before Soren gets started, I'll go ahead and pass it over to Gary real quick. He can give a short intro about hunts and what they do, and then he'll introduce Soren for you guys. So like I said, I hope you enjoy the presentation, and I'll pass it to you, Gary.
Thank you. I appreciate it. So my name's Gary Faber. I work for Hunt's Photo and Video, as you know. And just looking, most people I do recognize majority of the people on here. So thank you all for the support and everything you've done for Hunts over the years. Little bit about Hunts. I mean, if you're ever looking for anything or need anything, feel free to reach out to me. And I'll be sure to take care of you and provide you the good customer service, the personalized service and the personal touch and whatever you need. I'm really here to be a resource, be a friend to you, and help you out and go the extra mile and help you out the best I can to get you the best prices and the best service. So that's a little about what I do. Also, we do a lot of education as well, Hunts Now. So if you go onto our Hunts website, click on Hunts EDU, you can see everything we're doing from online classes to birding trips around the country, to everything we do around the country stuff we do around the world. So that's a little about what we do and what we have. I will be attending the birding festival. So if any of you are attending the festival, I will be there as a vendor. So feel free to stop by, say hello, talk to me. And if you're looking for anything, I could certainly work up show prices for you. So that's a little about what I do. And then without further ado, I'll turn it over to I'll put my email down in chat. So if you need anything, reach out to me. I'm also doing a lot of photography now as well. So if you're not following me on Facebook, Instagram, you can follow along and see what I'm doing on my Instagram page, which is Gary R. Faber photo, or my Facebook page. But you can follow along and see what I'm doing there. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Soren. I've been working with Soren now for about 3 years. It feels like I've worked with him for about 15 years. We have really developed an incredible working relationship and a great friendship. Me and Soren were just in Alaska last week, had an amazing trip, and got a lot of incredible stuff. I came back totally exhausted, but it was an amazing trip. And Soren is a National Geographic photographer. He actually spoke this year in person at the North American Niche Photography Conference. He did a workshop, he did a class there, and he got amazing feedback. Hope to bring him back next year. He's done a lot of programs with different photography groups around the country, and I've received nothing but amazing feedback on his programs. So I'm truly honored to bring to you Soren on his program tonight. You guys are really, so sit back, enjoy it. It's really gonna be an incredible program, and he's gonna tell you a little about his journey as a photographer and his project that he's working on. So without further ado, Soren, it's all yours.
Thank you, Gary. Uh, let's see if this works. Yeah, thank you so much, Gary, and thank you to Hunts. Gary's the real deal. I get all my gear, and he's truly is always there for me when I break a camera and whatnot. But yeah, today I'm going to be talking about photography for conservation, and more so, it's going to be talking about being critical of the stories that you're telling when you're out taking pictures. So a little bit about me. I am a Tamron ambassador, work a lot with Gary at Hunts Photo, and I'm an engineering student at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and I am a National Geographic Explorer. You can find my Instagram at Soren Goldsmith or check out my website, sorengoldsmith.com. And a quick summary of what I'm going to be talking about today, a little bit about my story as a conservation photographer, and then talking about why your photography matters, talking about project design if you're going to pursue a photography project. Then I'm going to be talking about using emotion in your pictures. And then in the end, we'll put everything together, and I have a extra exciting sneak peek on a new thing I've been working on. And then we'll have time for some questions. So to start, I want you to imagine that you're boating through the Amazon. It's hot, the vegetation is dense, and you look up into the trees and you're hearing the sounds of birds and insects all around you, but you can't see them. That was my experience when I was 10 years old on a family trip to the Amazon. And Lucky for me, I had a guide. And my guide had a big long lens camera, and he was able to take photos of these birds and these insects in the trees and show them to me. And through those photos, rather than being kind of unsure what was going on, I felt a connection to these animals. And so when I returned home to the urban area outside of Massachusetts that I'm from, I sought out that connection. But as you can see, there's a lot of buildings, there's not a lot of green spaces, and I looked around my neighborhood and I just wasn't seeing it. I wasn't seeing these birds. I wasn't finding that connection. And the more I looked into it, the more I realized that not only was I not finding the connection, but the people in my community were also not finding that connection. And so as soon as I could afford a camera, I got one because I hoped that maybe I could be a guide for my community in the same way that my guide was for me. And so I started taking photos, and at first I was trying to get my settings down. I wanted these intimate shots that really showed my subject's personality, good lighting, all that. I started to get a little bit creative with it, like with this heron silhouetted by the moon. And then I started getting interested in expanding the context of my subject. Like, what is it like to be this animal? Where does it live? And shooting on wider angles so that I could see its environment, like in this skimmer here or in this elk here. This one was on Point Reyes National Seashore, just north of San Francisco. And as you can see, in addition to seeing that elk, you get to see what it's like to be that elk, what its home is like, where does it live? Um, I wanted to make animals that were inaccessible, feel accessible, and sort of evoke this sense of wonder and immersion in my subjects. And so one day, after a couple years of photography, I heard about some coyotes that had been crossing the road late at night near my town. And so I went out, it was freezing, and after a couple hours, I captured this. And when I captured this photo, I was so excited because to me, I loved coyotes. I'd always wanted to see one, and this was right in the center of my town in Massachusetts. I thought it was so cool that such an elusive animal that I never really had seen before was right there. But when I shared it with my community and the people around me, that wasn't the response that I got. People saw it as scary. They were afraid of it. They didn't want this anywhere near them. And when I thought about it more critically, I realized that even though coyotes aren't gonna attack a person and there's not a dangerous thing to have around, this photo wasn't doing anything to challenge that narrative. In the photo, this coyote looks far away. He looks scary. He's in the shadow. He looks mysterious, not like a thing that you would want in your backyard, but something kind of creepy. And so what I realized is that as a photographer, I needed to have some control over this, to control the story I was telling. And this is my first question is, what story do your pictures tell? And you can't settle for just taking a picture and not being conscious of the story that you might have told, good or bad. And so upon realizing this, I sought out a new technology. These are what you're looking at here is a DSLR camera trap. It's like a motion activated photo booth for animals in the woods. And you might have seen traditional game cams, which are the same idea. The only difference here is that I've got a full-fledged DSLR that can take a really high quality image of my subject. And these allow me to get closer to my animal. They allow me to get them well lit in the dark and
Yeah,
get
I started hearing, a little bit of thunder and stuff.
um and so that was the start of my first project. This is a basic picture of what it looks like. You have your flashes to illuminate your animal. You have your camera and a waterproof housing for it. And then you have a motion sensor that's infrared to detect when that subject moves by, and that's heat based. So if you see like a warm coyote walking by, it will take a shot. And this is an example of what a setup might look like from above, where you have an active game trail in the middle, and you arrange your light to get a good light and a good fill light to fill in the shadows. Motion sensor, and then your camera can get a cool shot of your animal walking down the trail. So this is a picture of the first setup that I ever did. And when you're setting up the camera trap, there's a couple key things I look for. Firstly, I'm looking for a place that has food and a place that has water for the animals, like natural attractants. And then another thing I'm looking for is an active game trail, which is basically an area that you're noticing a lot of animals walk by. You might notice footprints. You can see on the left here a lot of footprints going by. And then the fourth thing and the most important thing is what I would call a natural choke point, which is any area where a lot of animals are forced to pass through. So good examples of this would be a hole in a fence. Any animal that wants to go through the fence has to go through the same hole. Or another good example is a log that fell over a river. Most of the animals that are going to cross the river are going to cross over that log. But a camera trap doesn't always need to be in the forest. This was a project I did where I put it on top of the tallest building in Madison, Wisconsin. And I was trying to get a peregrine falcon with the city in the background. I didn't end up getting the shot, but it definitely was doable. So once I set it up, here's me testing it, making sure my lighting looks good, and then I let it sit. And when I came back after a couple weeks, 99% of my shots look something like this, which is empty, nothing. It was probably triggered by leaves blowing in the wind. But 1% of my shots are going to look something like this. These are two urban raccoons on a nighttime stroll, and as you can see, they don't look far away. They don't look scary. They don't look distant. They don't look like the pests that people commonly associate raccoons to be, but rather they look emotional. They look like something that you might be able to connect to and something that you'd be happy to have in your neighborhood. And just like that, an animal that has commonly a negative perception around it seems like a much more positive thing, something that this photo has been able to offer a different narrative from what is traditionally seen. Again, here we have the coyote, not far away, not distant, but he's well lit. You can see his fur, you can see his eyes, he's up close, he looks personal. He looks like something you can connect to. And so I kept on doing this and I kept on taking photos of the wildlife in my town. And I started to put together this ecological picture of the skunks and deer coming to check out my camera trap. They're pretty confused by what it is. More coyotes came by to see what was up. This is an opossum right in my backyard. One of my favorite shots of a northern flicker. And this one I remember specifically because I was going through the marsh to hike out to this spot. And even though it was a really urban area, this patch was like the dead center of a marsh that no one would ever walk into. And I'd come out with no less than 30 ticks up and down my legs that I'd have to like pick off one by one. But I think it was worth it for the shot. A raccoon in the flash did a great job illuminating the snow. Um, and yeah, that was a wrap on my first winter of camera trapping. So I chose to include this picture to talk about why your photography matters because it's a great example of something that we hear a lot about rat poison and its influence on birds of prey. But when you actually see something like this was a very well-loved screech owl that was living in the courtyard of an apartment building. And to see this recognizable owl dead like this is very emotionally impactful, and somebody that might not previously care about the use of rat poison suddenly is going to see this, and legitimately this photo could have the power to change someone's perception and translate a problem into actually making a difference in conservation, using emotion and revealing something that people don't usually see, understanding something that people don't usually understand. This is a photo of a raccoon I took right in the middle of Madison. And the reason I included this photo is to talk about how the things that you're going to be able to tell the most powerful story about are the things that are closest to you. I think there's a lot of times this idea that, oh, well, I live in like an urban, boring place and I'm not going to be able to tell a really cool story about it and I need to go away to a national park. But the thing is, you don't know as much about a national park as you know about your backyard. So you're not going to be able to tell as interesting of a story. You don't know it like you know your backyard. And so focusing on your backyard or your city or your town is going to be the most interesting. And also it's going to do a good job showing people that wildlife is everywhere. It's not just in these specific protected places, but really we need to protect wildlife everywhere. And this is a big thing with National Geographic. They're not going to send a photographer from Norway to photograph Africa. They're going to send a photographer from Africa to photograph Africa and vice versa. This is a little bit about project design and my philosophy on it. When I start photography, and honestly, even nowadays, scattered work is what my work model is basically I go out and I look around and I see what I see and I take the photos that I see. And it's great. It's super fun and a lot of good stuff comes out of this. I mean, this is probably what I mostly do. But if you're looking for a way to give more meaning to your photography, I would really support doing more project-based work, which is the idea that you have a central goal in mind, and every photo you take is directly to support that goal. And I'll give you some examples about what a goal might be. But first, I want to talk about the theory of change, and this is another big thing with National Geographic, and it's the idea that it's hard to take someone from being completely unaware about something to wanting to change it and wanting to support it. Rather, it's a reasonable expectation to say, oh, well, someone's unaware. Let's make them aware of it. That's a reasonable goal. Or someone's aware about something, and now I want them to engage with it. Very reasonable goal. Engage to support. But it's not like you're going to have this like vastly influential change with a storytelling project. Rather, it's going to be over time, it's going to be gradual. And going from unaware to aware is as important of a step as getting someone from supporting something to actually causing change. This is a cool acronym about setting goals, like I was talking about, and it's called SMART goals, which is the specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-based. Specific means that you want your goal to actually be a achievable thing. So like, for example, instead of saying, oh, I want to save the trees, you could instead be like, I want to save 1,000 trees. And that way, when you save 1,000 trees, you know you did it. Whereas like you're never going to be able to save the trees because that doesn't really mean anything. It has no specifics to it. Measurable means that you can actually quantitatively analyze if you did it. Like, for example, 1,000 trees. I know if I did 500 or 1,000 trees that are saved. Achievable is just being reasonable with yourself. And relevant is having a goal that actually matters and not something that is sort of not realistic in the span of your project. And then time-based means that you want to have your goal ready in a timely manner, depending on the scope of your project. And then the last thing I want to talk about is the impact storytelling method that is used at National Geographic. And this is that once you have your goal, the next thing you need to do is figure out the actors that need to act in order to get your goal to change. So that could be like the government. And then the platform is how are you going to reach those people? Are you going to go to like town meeting? Are you going to make a social media post? Step 4 is the call to action. Like, what do you want those actors to do? Step 5 is the success metric. How do you know you were successful? And step 6 is creative. Like, in what are you going to do to achieve this? Are you going to take photos? You're going to make a film? Are you going to give a talk? So there's a lot of routes to design a project in this kind of way. I want to give a quick shout out to Hunt's Photo. People a lot of times ask me the gear that I use. So currently I'm shooting mainly on the Nikon Z8, which I absolutely love if you're a Nikon shooter. And then I've been using the Tamron 150 to 500 and also the Tamron 35 to 150, which are like just amazing lenses, especially for their price. Underwater stuff, I like using the Olympus TG6, which is not like a full-fledged underwater camera, but it also costs a tenth of the price, and it's pretty good. And then for my camera trapping, I use the Nikon D5600s, and then I use Camtraptions, which if you're interested in using camera traps, Camtraptions is my favorite brand. And then I also have the Mavic Mini for drones. But yeah, Hunts is the spot. I wanted to go from my project design into the first like serious project that I took on. And it was about this forest in my town that was proposed to be clear cut and then turned into a parking lot. And you can see what this was going to look like from above. And this was pretty sad because there wasn't very many continuous stretches of forest in my town that were left for wildlife to live on. And so to have a spot like this in such an urban area was really important to that ecosystem. And so what I ended up doing is I figured I could put my camera traps on here and I might actually be able to help convince some people that this shouldn't happen. And so that's what I did. And I got in touch with a local environmental group that was trying to fight this from happening. And I got my camera traps all set up and ready to go and deployed them in the forest. And I ended up capturing this. And this is personally my favorite photo I've ever taken. And there's a lot of reasons why. Firstly, this coyote is beautiful and he's up close and intimate and you can really connect to him. A second reason I like it is because he's heading away from the town and into the refuge of this forest with this giant mature tree. And then the third thing I like about it is that this house here in the background is identifiable. People that have the power to stop this forest from being built probably see that house on their drive to work. They know it and they understand and contextualize that into their lives. I kept on going. I took photos of other animals like this fox in the forest, more coyotes coming by, and then a fleet of other pictures. And none of these pictures are particularly great, but what they do is they contribute to that story of all the animals that are living and relying on this forest. It doesn't need to be an amazing photo. Like this is like literally the butt of a skunk, but it doesn't matter because we know it's a skunk and we know that it's there. And so the story is really what matters more than the perfect quality of my images. And then I wanted to talk a little bit about emotion and how people remember emotion the most. And think about your favorite movie that you've ever seen. You probably don't remember the words or the script to the film, but what you definitely remember is how that movie made you feel. And this is the exact same with photography. People aren't going to remember this patch of dirt or the perfect composition, but if that photo left an impact on them, they're going to remember it. And I put some two photos that I think are like some of the most famous photos ever. And I think this is exactly the situation here. You have Afghan girl, people feel something when they look at that photo, or these workers on New York. And what I learned is that the emotions that are the most powerful to remember are the emotions of wonder and the emotions of awe. These are some photos that I've taken that I think have a little bit of this sense, at least I can hope. This owl was taken in a valley in Oregon on like a 10-second exposure, and I was able to get the stars as a bokeh in the background, and it has this wondrous sense. Or a great gray owl with his big eyes looking at me in this sense of awe. Or this photo of black skimmers that I showed a little earlier. Again, it's immersive and it's like, wow, it would be cool to be right there and have that sense of wonder. Which all this now leads me to my most recent work. This is my project that ended up getting funded by National Geographic, and it's called Project Marshlight. And what it's all about is the salt marshes of Massachusetts. And what I hoped to do when I did this project was put together using powerful emotions and environmental context this idea of being able to protect these salt marsh lands by protecting and promoting the animals that live in them, which is something I touched on, but I want to go into a little more detail, which is it's hard for people, especially in the government, to care about like an acre of forest, but it's easier for people to care about a wolf. So if we want to protect an acre of forest, our best bet is to tell the story of the animals that are relying on that land. And animals are obviously very special, but animals can be replaced at the end of the day, but the land cannot. And so the best tactic that I tried to employ in this project is if we want to protect the marshes, we need to tell the story of the wildlife. And then I also try to have a realistic and measurable goal and be conscious of how I'm telling my stories in addition to the stories themselves. So this is a aerial of the salt marsh, and what I immediately learned right off the bat and what got me so interested was salt marshes are important for three main reasons. One is they protect coastal communities, like this one that you can see right here. If it weren't for the marsh, this sandbar that these houses are built on would likely be eroded straight into the sea, and there would be no land for those houses to live on. It would also make them much less resilient to storms. Salt marshes also protect one of the most unique and biodiverse ecosystems in New England. Um, and they store 5 times more carbon per acre than a tropical forest would. And that's because of these dense stores of peat deep into the earth. And so at first, when I started pursuing this project, it was really, I was just educating myself. And so I went out and started seeing what I saw, doing that scattered shooting method and learning and trying to find a story that I might be able to tell to help these ecosystems. I started contacting a lot of people who work on them, be it conservationists or engineers or lawyers, and asking them all the same question, which is, what is the greatest challenge that the marsh is facing that isn't necessarily being addressed? And I got a variety of answers, but the central idea is that all through and through, people didn't understand the urgency of protecting these lands. And I didn't really know about this yet. What is the urgency? Why do they need to be protected? And I started exploring and I realized that every single salt marsh that I'd ever been to looked something like this. And what you'll see here is all these horizontal lines cut through kind of as far as you can see. And it's not just this marsh that looks like this, but every marsh in the state looks like this. Why is there all these horizontal lines in the marsh? And I did some research, and what I learned is that what these are is called mosquito ditches. And they were probably dug 100 years ago. And what they were meant to do is release the water that was pooling higher up in the marsh so that there was less stagnant water sitting in the marsh and then hopefully lower the mosquito population. And at the time that people did this, they weren't trying to kill the marsh. They didn't have bad intent, but it also didn't work and the mosquito population didn't go down. And the other problem is that as a result of all these ditches, the marsh is way weakened to erosion. So it's causing the peat to be decomposed more quickly. And then as the sea level rises, um, it's causing them to be weakened to erosional decay of the forces of storms and just water going in and out. And then it's also, the third thing is it's creating habitat for invasive species to come into these ecosystems. And so what I learned, and the reason this urgency was so important, is that we actually are lucky that we have the tools to remediate these ditches and save the marsh. The problem is that we don't have the government systems in place to give permits to allow people to do this. And so even though people might want to save the marsh and there's no reason not to do it, the government is not putting enough urgency on getting this done. And so that's what the project's all about and building this sense of urgency. Another thing about the marsh is that a lot of them are very closely linked to human development. Like this road was just built straight through the middle of this one. A lot of houses are built right on them. And so right now the projection is that if we aren't doing anything, we might lose almost 90% of our marshes by the end of the century. And that means losing this road and a lot of houses with it. So then as I was talking about having animal ambassadors, I began seeking one out, and that was when I learned about the salt marsh sparrow. And I believe that the salt marsh sparrows are the only bird that are endemic to the east coastline. And the current projection expects them to be extinct in 25 years. And the reason for this is because they lay their eggs right on the edge of the high marsh, which is the area that floods over completely with water about once every 2 weeks. And so what these birds have evolved to do is they lay their eggs, and those eggs will have hatched in that 2 week span before it floods over again and makes the nesting unsuccessful. And so in a broader sense, this is the area that these birds are living. So if any of the babies were not out of the nest by this time, they would all be flooded. And so as the sea level rises and our marshes disappear, so do the salt marsh sparrows. So another really important reason. What researchers are doing now is putting a lot of effort into banding them to make sure that they have reliable numbers and they know exactly what we need to do to protect this species. This was a researcher with Mass Audubon, and he is measuring the wing and checking population numbers, and they've been pretty successful over the past couple years getting data. And what they do in the salt marsh, which I found very cool, is they set up their net in the middle of a circle, and then they make a giant circle around the net, and then everybody at once walks towards the center, and any bird that might be hiding in the grass gets scared away by the people, wants to fly away from them, and then they kind of get cornered and flown into the net, and then a gentle conservationist will come by and collect the bird and process it. This is just a really cute photo of the salt marsh sparrow getting his head measured. And so with the work that these researchers are doing, they're helping tell the story in another way, in a scientific way, of these birds, letting me come out and documenting it, and hopefully raising this urgency to get this remediation happening more quickly. And so I kept on going and I kept on learning about the marsh, and then I learned about the northern diamondback terrapin, and these are the only species of turtle that live in brackish water, is what terrapins are. They're like this iconic salt marsh turtle. And they're in big trouble because the areas that they like to nest are these sandy beaches that are usually taken up by houses nowadays. They're also getting hit by cars, and so and they're also important indicator species, meaning that if they're around, it means that the ecosystem is doing well. The turtles are important because their main source of food is the salt marsh snail. And these snails are important to the ecosystem, but they can overpopulate. And so if the turtles aren't there to keep them in check, then the snails will overpopulate, and then the snails will eat too much grass and peat and the stuff that actually holds the marsh together. And if they eat too much of that, then the marsh is going to erode more quickly. And stuff like this, which huge chunks of peat are falling off of our marshes, is just going to happen faster and faster. So without the terrapins, there's too much snails, and the erosion happens more quickly, which is why it is so important that we protect our turtles and we help manage this ecosystem. These are some researchers that are doing just that, and they actually go out with these, they're basically cages so that when the eggs hatch out of the nest, the turtles are captured, and the turtles, they can count them and know how many there are, and then they can also make sure they're protected from predators before they get while they're too small to defend themselves. And yeah, photo turtle, diamondback terrapin underwater, taking a breath of air. And I'm really excited to talk about what's next. What I just talked about is the salt marsh and its wildlife's basic story. And all those photos are ones that I took last summer to prepare to pitch this story and seek funding from National Geographic. And so this summer, now that I have that funding, me and my team want to take this story to a new level. And that's what I'm really excited to introduce to you guys today. What I noticed from being out in the marsh is that animals like the terrapins are super skittish. Like this was the best photo I was able to get of one underwater before he just darted away from me, wanted nothing to do with me. And they're not the only salt marsh animals that are really hard to document. Fish are skittish. A lot of the birds that are there are skittish. Um, Another thing I wanted to tell the story of was how the tidal cycles influence the marsh. And so there might be an area where you'll have a bird walking by on land, and then 2 hours later, all of a sudden, it's underwater and a fish is swimming by. And how do I tell that story of how the land and the water is so connected? And so I was going to school for engineering, and I thought, what if I could actually build something to tackle this? And so I took the idea of our camera trap that we talked about earlier. We have our infrared sensor, camera and batteries to make the whole thing work. And I thought, well, what if I could put this underwater for my turtles? Um, what I immediately found out is that the infrared motion sensor wasn't going to work because infrared doesn't go through water. So I needed a new kind of sensor. One option was sonar, and then another option would be visible light. And visible light is basically the camera itself is the sensor, and the camera looks at its environment and it says, are the pixels that I'm seeing the same or different from how they were a second ago? And if they're different enough, then it could trigger a photo. Sonar was quickly ruled out because it just took too much power to actually have it last for like a week or two without being checked. So we went down the visible light route, and we ended up designing this sensor that did just that, and it detected motion underwater in a efficient enough way that we could actually put it into a camera trap. And so once we had this system, the next step was putting that thing in a watertight housing and making it actually work. And so me and my team, we got to it and we ended up designing a system where we have our cameras up here and our batteries back here and some circuitry and computers to get the whole thing working. And then we built it for real. And then we put it underwater. And that is the story of how we made what is, to my knowledge, the first motion activated underwater DSLR. Gave it a little bit of a paint job, and this was it deployed for the first time out on the salt marsh in Massachusetts. And after a little while, this ended up happening, which was a very incredible moment where we got our first photos of a diamondback terrapin in front of our camera. And if I was standing there, that turtle never would have gotten that close. And so I actually have a whole talk that I give about photo engineering and what it took to build this systems and systems like it, that I may be able to give to you guys one day. But currently, we've had incredible success, and I'm unfortunately can't share the photos yet. So stay tuned. But I'm very, very excited because I believe these cameras have the power this summer and in the future to tell stories that really have never been possible with camera trapping underwater. And so for this reason going forward, my main goal really is to get them into the hands of more people. But overall, I want to leave you with this. Photography is the power to change how we see the world. And so the next time you're out taking photos, think about the story that you're telling, the emotion that you're portraying, and the window into the world that other people will now get to experience and realize that as a photographer, you have the power to shape that story and make an impact in conservation or in any other thing that you care about. So thank you so much. I have some time for questions, and if you're interested in underwater camera traps, let me know. And you can follow my Instagram here at Soren Goldsmith.
That's awesome. Thank you so much, Soren. That was great. A lot of great things that you touched on there. I think, at least personally for me, what I loved of what you were talking about kind of early on with that coyote was making that connection with people. That's one of the things that we talk about all the time at Tucson Bird Alliance is that, yes, we are a bird-centered organization, but really we're trying to inspire people. Because again, if you can't make that connection, it's just going to be lost. So I thought that was a really important part that you brought up. We do have a couple of questions that were in the chat. And if you have a question for Soren, you can feel free to ask him here in just a second. But just I'll kind of go through them. Gail asked, and this was in regards to one of your raccoon questions in an apartment complex. Did you have anybody object to you setting up a camera in an apartment complex, or just in general, do you ever kind of run into pushback from people who just want to know what you're up to, or maybe have a problem with it? And if you do, how do you approach that?
Yeah, so with the forest, what I did is I went to homeowners that were right next to the forest. And then I said, "Can I put my camera on your backyard?" And so I was like, technically the cameras were located off the forest and on private property, and then they were taking photos like into the forest or right on the edge of it. But sometimes I'll just try to hide my cameras really well so no one finds them, or putting like threatening uh tags on them, like all components are GPS tracked and I will fine you and get you arrested if you touch them, which isn't true, but I hope that it scares people away enough. But yeah, it's like it's a mix between keeping them hidden and being a little strategic.
Well, you kind of answered a question that I had, but I do still have a separate one. So when you set up these camera traps along a game trail, for example, how long, just in general, do you notice it takes until kind of things return to normal? You know what I mean? Just, or do you notice if your presence alters the behavior of the animals at all? It may not. And then the second part was, how do you secure your gear? But you kind of covered that with the
Yeah.
semi official letters that you put on there. But yeah, just
Yeah.
more wondering how it affects the actual wildlife when you put them up.
Yeah. So the good news is the camera trapping I've done has been pretty urban, so the animals have been around like people in neighborhoods, so it's not crazy that like a light would go off when they walk by, and so if I were to go into like a much more remote area, I'm not sure how that would change. But there are animals that will come by and they don't like the camera or the flash will bother them. And so it's something to be conscious of. That's why I change the camera location pretty regularly. And then I also know that since the camera doesn't move, the animals will just avoid it if they don't like it very much. But in terms of, I think what I've seen people do if it's in a more remote area is they set the camera up for like a month before they do anything with it. And then once they get used to it, then they turn it on and start getting photos.
Wow. Okay.
Um,
Yeah, that's a lot longer than I was thinking, but that's cool to hear. Whilst I'm gonna come to one that's actually related to that, and then go back to another one. But you were kind of talking about the flash, and
you're muted.
I'm sorry, man. We've only been doing these Zoom meetings for 4 years. I'll get the hang of it soon. But no, Amanda was asking, kind of related to what you mentioned. It kind of is, how do the animals do with the flash and those nighttime camera traps? Is it one of those things they don't kind of notice till it's too late, or do some shy away from it?
Usually, most animals I've photographed don't care. Uh, I've had animals that do care, and once they get flashed, they tend to just like walk around the backside of the camera or just go outside the trigger so they don't get photographed. Um, and so yeah, the only can't the only animal that I intentionally don't want to camera trap is owls because I've heard bad things about how the flash might affect them when their eyes at night.
Yeah, that's a great point. I'm glad you brought that up with owls. Um, Mary had a question. Just kind of give us an update. So, did the plan for the parking lot get scrapped? Did it get amended? Or has anything been updated? What's kind of the current status because of the project that you did there?
Yeah. So this is I actually I meant to touch on this. And so the camera, the forest unfortunately did end up getting clear cut. And it's something that is very upsetting for me, but what I choose to do is rather than take it as like a full defeat, I take it as a learning opportunity. And what I learned is that at the time that I got involved in that forest, and a lot of people did, it was already too late because a lot of the decisions that were led to it getting approved had already gone through. And so now my takeaway is that going into the future, I need to make sure that I'm ahead of the game and I'm ready to go so that I catch these things before at a time when I can actually make sure I'm making an impact.
Yeah, and that's a good point, Soren. You're right. A lot of these things, there is a public comment period a lot of the times, but they, I don't want to sound too cynical, but I think they intentionally don't do a great job of promoting that. That way they can say, hey, we opened it up for public comment, didn't hear from you, so we moved ahead. That's one of the things we try to do at Tucson Bird Alliance, to spread that kind of thing around. There's kind of a saying in conservation that, industry or the developers, they just have to win once. Environmentalists have to win every single time, because like you saw, once those trees are cut, the trees are cut. And so, yeah, it is something that's tough to keep on, but it's good that you raised it. Let's see, that was the last one in the chat. And like I said, Soren does have a heart out here in just a couple minutes. Just a real quick comment from Brenda. She just says she loves the combination of the art, the nature, the conservation, and the engineering. And I think too, that's a good point that she put there, because you come at it, we do these, every so often with hunts, and we have different people come on. And I did appreciate kind of the technical aspect that you brought to it. And I think that has to do with your engineering background, just kind of coming through the diagram that you showed, kind of the overhead shot of that game trail with the things. That was really, really helpful way to see it. So yeah, and just another comment from Tina, saying thank you, that she's inspired to work on a conservation photography project. So that you smile, that brings a smile to my face too, because again, that's kind of what we are about here, is inspiring people. Because it just doesn't happen on its own. These places can't be protected without people, these animals. So I'm happy to see that you inspired somebody this morning. That shows us that this was well worth it. Well, let's see if anybody has a question that they would like to ask Soren themselves. You can go ahead and unmute yourself and ask that question. But if not, then I would always invite everybody to just go ahead and unmute yourself. And let's all tell Soren thank you. Let's tell Gary thank you. And just know, before we all wrap up, again, like I said, this video was recorded. I'll upload it onto YouTube, and then a little bit later this afternoon, I'll send out a wrap-up email to everybody. I'll have Soren's contact info. I have Gary and Hunt's photos contact info, as well as a link to this YouTube presentation. And if you have any questions as well, I know sometimes things pop up. If you're like me, as soon as this thing ends, you'll think, oh, I should have asked this. No problem at all. Just reply to that email that I send out. I'll be happy to pass that question along to Soren or Gary, or answer it myself if I'm able to. So with that said, everybody, please give Soren a big thank you. Really appreciate his time being here this morning.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Great
Thank you.
presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for
Thank
having
you
me.
very much. It was wonderful.
Awesome. Well, again, everybody, thank you all so much for being here. And thank you in helping us further our mission of helping people. We're inspiring people to protect and enjoy birds. With that said, I hope everybody has an absolutely wonderful afternoon. Try to be cool this afternoon, and maybe get out and see some birds this evening. All right, everybody. Thank you so much.
All
Have a
right.
great.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good night. Have a good day.
Thanks.
Thank you.
All righty.
All
Bye-bye.
right. Bye-bye.